In multiple ways, the Golgari are the most down-to-earth guild. A city that has stones and people. It has death and life. And the Golgari don't see it this way. To them, stones, death, life and people are the same. It's all part of a cycle of decaying or slowly decaying matter. The Golgari are the guild of green. Mana for life, growth, a symbiosis in a hive of organisms that strengthen each other. They're the guild of creation, the guild that feeds a whole city plane from seemingly nothing. But again, the Golgari don't see it that way. To the Golgari, the discarded and the death are everything that life is. They're the same thing. The Golgari are about decay because it feeds life and life feeds death in the same way. The Golgari are one, not out of a sense of duty or unity, but because life, death and all the hive are one. They share a mind, not because they want to be the same, but because they are. They feel pride, not because they are selfish, but because it's natural to be proud of what is real. Definitely in a made-up world like Ravnica. That's why they can embrace their mortality. They know that they're just a part of the cycle and that the cycle lives on for them. The Golgari are about recycling, but also about erosion. They're about balance and the natural order. Again, not like the Azorius who make up rules, for example, but like the Golgari who live according to the real rules of life and death. Then on life and death again. Ravnica has almost no fertile nature. That's why they recycle anything. But in a city, there is a lot of waste. The Golgari strive to gather it all and to make something new from it. Or to sell it back to the surface so that the hive may grow strong. Deathrite's Shaman is one of the most famous Golgari cards. This card is all about recycling because it exiles something from the graveyard. A place we all thought of as useless once upon a time. And then the Shaman makes something useful out of those discarded bones. Mana, a spell or life. Many Ravnicans wouldn't understand a beast with 6 arms and huge antlers held together not by skin but by fungi as beautiful. But to the Golgari, this is what the cycle is about. About parts that are nothing alone but everything together. Many years of slow evolution coming together into one massive being, ready to cycle once again. I haven't shown the locket of every guild, but for the Golgari it's beautiful. For one, they're just tools for other members to find your body and reuse it, to resurrect you, perhaps. But the art is even more special. There are fungi growing under the locket. Maybe the body was forgotten and now new life is sprouting. But I love to think that the fungi had sprouted when the body was found and that the reanimator who had found it thought the body had its new purpose already, so no need to alter or resurrect it. The Golgari were founded as a guild because the city needed farmers. At first, the Golgari were ruled by elves who resurrected zombies to do their dirty work. They loved nature and found it in bounty underneath the city. But the necromancers turned sour without the sun and started waging war upon the other guilds under their leader, Svoktir. But the Golgari guild was and is a guild with multiple factions. As many black-aligned guilds and groups are, the Teratogens are the group formed by all outcasts, but mostly the Gorgons. They joined the Golgari like many other underground creatures who couldn't be touched by the light of the upper city, but in their case they couldn't touch the light. While the Golgari almost never reject any strong being, they do resent the Gorgons, because they turn perfect parts of the cycle into statues that decay so slowly, but they still decay, just in their own ways. This resentment from mostly the Devkaran made the Teratogens and the Devkaran under the semi-immortal Svoktir be at war. The leaders of the Teratogens were the Sisters of Stone Death. They defeated Svoktir but couldn't destroy his head. Even though they have an exile ability, let's just say they put Svoktir under their control, because he was put in their forming guild hall. His head rested in Svoktos, a late Ortov cathedral, one that is itself becoming an organism just from the necromantic powers of Svoktir, and the life that surrounds the church. Golgari leadership changes with the underground winds, because soon after Savra, the Vkaran elf, resurrected Svoktir with just his head and added body parts of many strong Ravnikans. 2 of the 5 stone sisters were killed then, leaving just 1 after Svoktir had killed 2 before. The Devkarin are at the root of murderous intent in the guild, just like they are at the root of all life on Ravnica. The elves are vengeful, strong, magical, and would do anything for a place large enough for their massive egos. They're brooding, plotting, and ambitious elves, a mirror to their Celestian kin. More real, perhaps. The Devkarin commission humans and crawl to imbue them with moon marks. These are signs of power and often enchantments that strengthen the Devkarin. They conveniently make the elves look like scary insects with multiple eyes. Savra was their matka once, or their leader when she became guildmaster. She would resurrect Svoktir not out of loyalty but because she needed him to defeat the Stone Sisters. She also killed him again when she faced the opportunity. Savra's brother Gerard overtook Savra. He had a real love for his guild because he knew Ravnica would end at the Golgari. He knew it was the most important place because everything ends up in the Undercity. Gerard himself was sacrificed to Lord Rakdos and then resurrected as a lich, keeping his control over the guild. Gerard's vision was to keep the Golgari hidden after everything that had happened. Most guilds went into hiding at this time to the Decimillennial. Gerard used this time to hunt with his son. Gerard controls zombies, insects, and his guild easily and with fervor. But like with any cycle, leadership should cycle through as well, especially between the elves and the Gorgons of this guild. It's not that the Golgari hate leadership like the Gruul do, it's just that changing leaders is what happens when you're ambitious and all about power. Enter Vraska. In her youth, Vraska had been taken by the Azorius in a big raid on the Golgari called the Dusk End Purges. The raid came about because the swarm was becoming too strong in the eyes of the Azorius, not because Vraska had already murdered countless innocent lives. The Azorius were uncomfortable in the dark rooms that they had to keep the Golgari in, and their stares were breaking their strong spirits. They felt like they had to move the prisoners to another place with more light. On their way, one of the Golgari sacrificed himself so that he could free a Gorgon's eyes. Together, they didn't expect a Golgari to do something like this, but the Golgari didn't care about one life and cared about the swarm. So a fight broke out, and Vraska, the Gorgon, was cornered by an Azorius officer. She then planeswalked for the first time. Through this attack we really see the conflict between the Golgari and the Azorius. The Azorius try to control their city, while the Golgari act according to what's there already. They grow as a guild and decay everything at the same time. They're a thorn in the side of the Azorius because of how stable they are. The Azorius pay to be on top of the guild class, putting the Golgari on the lowest point. But more about the guild relations in total in my upcoming huge guild relations video. Later, the Azorius who signed the Dusk End Purges was asked by an old friend to join her in a shady place. JV had helped him a long time ago when they were both idealistic and wanted to have executions be stricter. But he'd become corrupt, as you'd guess. JV then showed him a corpse of a judge with the words proof and judge engraved in him. JV told Relov, the signer, that he knew the judge because they both had signed on the Dusk End paper. And now Relov was the last of the people who worked on it, aside from Esperia, the supreme judge who had asked the judges to work on it. Someone who loved to be seen was put on public display after he was killed. The judge's heart had been ripped out after he was killed. Or the judge that Relov had seen, who had died by the words he had loved so much. Or the guard that had attacked Vraska, who was placed with his brain in his hand like the lapdog he was and his skull filled with coin. Apparently the killer was killing people the way they lived, but Relov refused to see it because Relov had just signed the papers. JV came to Relov's home that night, telling him that all the guilds have rules, like the Azorius do, even the Golgari, because life into death and death into life is their motto, but also in a way a rule. Whoever disturbs the cycle must experience a profound cycle into death. And Relov with his negligence had given many an unworthy death. So tonight Vraska herself would kill Relov because his way of living was inaction. Vraska had literally set her trauma in stone with these killings. She believed that a person should die the death they deserved, a warped version of the Golgari philosophy. Later, Vraska killed people with names like Innistrad and Sandiki Kar, so that Jace knew that a planeswalker was behind those killings. Vraska killed all those people just to get Jace's attention, but Jace escaped Vraska's attack with his mind powers, and he let the other guild masters know that Vraska was eventually planning to destroy every guild master via broadcasting her words to all the other guild masters. This made every guild, of course, distrust the Golgari, making them go into hiding, along with Vraska. Gerard and the other Golgari were plotting and were judging the Upsiders all the time. But let's get back to those people in a little bit. We will look at another faction, the Kraul, who were another race that wasn't accepted by the Golgari like the Gorgons were. They lived around the swarm for a long time, but they still felt attracted to the Golgari, for they had a close connection to life, death and the deeper parts of Ravnica. Some Kraul have wings and all lay their eggs in the body of another species. The young then see the carcass as their mother and can telepathically learn from it while they eat the dying creature. There's no way to get more Golgari than this. The Kraul seem peculiar to us, but they mostly have a different perspective, because they live as a literal hive. And all of the Golgari are pretty much a hive as well, so they fit perfectly within the guild. A living organism comprising of smaller organisms that seek to collect nutrients and converts them to usable resources. The swarm operates through a mutual drive to survive, but also because it's led by one single brain. Or this is at least true for the Kraul. Their direct leader is Mazarek. And Mazarek wants his people to be respected within the Golgari. With his clicks he can summon necromantic magic, and death strengthens him, creating an infinite loop when he channels, strengthening the Kraul hive. But even that wasn't enough to get them respected, because while Mazarek was a strong lich, there were many more liches from the Devkaran. So when Mazarek invited Gerard to a conversation, his servant laughed at the request from the Kraul. The Golgari didn't like hierarchy, but they did understand power. So Sobislav, the servant, assembled 15 soldiers and went to meet Mazarek on his own. The letter from Mazarek had a mushroom attached, which was an ancient and accurate way to tell another Golgari where to meet. Sobislav just had to follow the fungal system that the Golgari had built so many centuries before. And this location was far below the Undercity, a place that didn't want any living being housing near it. While getting closer, a headache was growing on Sobislav and his soldiers. It grew on him, and they realized too late that it was the Kraul's song. It turned into a migraine when Mazarek asked what the Golgari thought of the gruel, and after he finished his foolish answer that the Kraul were just laborers, Sobislav collapsed. Some days before, Mazarek was with Vraska drinking black tea. The Goliath Kraul, Death Priest, and the Gorgon were two big friends. Mazarek drank his tea with 8 teaspoons of sugar. Vraska asked whether he disliked being a leader, and he responded that he knew he was the best. But the Kraul have no concept of pride or ego, he just knew. The Kraul were a hive. Vraska told Mazarek that she'd be called prideful for that same thought. Mazarek wondered what the purpose of pride was. And then Vraska said, "If I am to be met with disrespect, then I must first love myself with a fierceness no fool can take away." And exactly that pride made Mazarek and the Hive turn against the Devkaren and got them accepted in the guild of the Golgari. Mazarek felt pride when he killed Soboslav's soldiers, captured their essence and fueled it into Soboslav. Soboslav was alive a moment more because of it and said, "The Crawl won't lead the Golgari." But Mazarek knew who would. And with the sacrifice of Soboslav and his soldiers, he could unleash their army, the erstwhile zombies, the ancient people of the Golgari, to serve their new queen. Later, when Vraska was already strong into her leadership, a rot farmer called Bozak manages to cultivate a rare mushroom. While his farm is one of the only ones to have them, he keeps a very beautiful specimen for himself. He preserves it in a cocoon. The farmer has pincers for hand, and he can't fly for long because of his deformed wing. When a dead rich Goliath roars, all insects around Bozak sing along with their chirps and clicks, among whom Bozak's sister Razi, who's the best singer in their family. She had always been Mother's favorite. Their mother is a dead carcass, but Bozak can see the pride in her eye sockets. The children had all fed on her rotting flesh, while the mother was intoxicated by the eggs so that he thought they were her own children. So she protected them with all her might. Her screams as she died were perfect lullabies for all of the larvae. From a beautiful warbling call, the insects switch to the song that tells of the news. A new lich has been named. All the Crawl around hope the new lich is Crawl, like Mazarek, the only Crawl lich. But it's another elf. But the elf is looking for someone who can identify mushrooms and has an interest in necromancy. So Bozak promises to apply. When he enters the Undercity, Bozak sees his competitors, beautifully clothed but pale in front of the lich, whose eyes have glazed over and the skin seems dead already. Beautiful. The mission is to find 4 of the most dangerous to find mushrooms. Mushrooms that could paralyze or kill at a touch. In a very Golgari fashion, only one apprentice will be taken. Only the most ambitious and best will survive. Bozak finds the first rooms, but the applicants are attacked by wood wraiths. Some are taken by the living trees, but from death, life. Bozak warns the rest and saves a Gorgon named Kata and another Crawl named Limin. The Crawl strike a deal to help each other, but Limin wants to seal it with a handshake instead of the customary rubbing of mandibles, and Bozak feels uneasy, understandably. The two come up to an elf that was ahead, but he stumbled in fear and punctured his zombie fungus cocoon. So he started to turn immediately. The fungus was already programming the elf, or at least his body, now host to a new generation of zombie fungus. The new zombie climbs to a tree easily and goes to sit there to decompose, hoping to later become food for the new spores to spread as far as possible. The two Crawl, move on, and eventually find the last mushroom, an angel cap, which turns you into a bloody frenzy before bringing you back to your senses. It's guarded by moss dogs, but Bozak snatches a mushroom. Limin fangs Bozak and flies off after waking the dogs. Bozak can't fly, so he's left to run, passing Kata the Gorgon. The dogs catch her, but Bozak distracts them so that she can petrify them. She also petrifies a bunch of locusts behind Bozak, which angers him enough. Kata turns on Bozak to petrify him too, but Bozak in anger pierces her with a spear made from another of his mother's legs. Bozak needs to get back quick, so he summons a Goliath by imitating its mating call and rides it towards victory. The beetle bails, but Bozak has a chance to catch up now. A Devkaren called Segodonis murders Limin and takes his shrooms, and both reach the lich and both get to serve. Yet Bozak gets to oversee drudges, which are dumber versions of fungus-led zombies. Meanwhile, Zagodonis gets to join the Lich for Gorosda, the Golgari guild hall of the time, because 3 Boros soldiers had touched zombie fungi and had climbed their guild towers to the top. Vraska had called the Liches to discuss how to prevent an invasion from the Boros. Lichy being gone did mean that Bozak got to secretly read through his elven necromancer spells. Bozak tries one and feels mana as though insects are marching over his arm, and he barely manages to raise a red corpse. Lichy enters and Bozak hides, letting him overhear that Lichy wants to plant an angel's room on Vraska to have her murder everyone. Bozak wants to warn her and distracts Lichy. He does this by strengthening the rat that he had just raised into a proper zombie and lets it bite Lichy's legs. Lichy gets to the huge high room where Vraska will speak later when Bozak had already left. But he needs to climb first. Bozak does, and doesn't dare to go so high. So he eats a zombie fungus in order to climb high enough. He forces the fungus to stop him from climbing with all of his willpower and gets to Vraska. But Mazarek spots him and Lichy grabs the angel's room and then jumps off out of the window, saving his swarm and holding it above his mortal life. Bozak had become part of Mazarek's zombie army after he died, and he hasn't been happier in his life. Well, not Mazarek's army of course, Vraska's. But Vraska soon got a mission from Nicobolas, with control over the Golgari as a reward. Her mission was to get the immortal sun from Ixalan, and Bolas promised a better world for Vraska's people and the respect they deserve. The dragon had read her mind. On Ixalan she became a loved captain of Breaches, Malcolm, Amelia, and eventually Jace, who got stranded on the plane without his memories. Sent by Nicobolas as well, weirdly after Jace lost the fight to the dragon. She was loved by her crew because she accepted the ragtag group of pirates and would always protect her people. Knew Jace hadn't deserved death yet, so Vraska didn't want to kill him yet. Jace would try to clap Vraska on the back, but Vraska had trauma from being hit and stopped Jace. Then, knew Jace and Vraska fell in love on the ship, out of respect, pride, and eventually a sense of attraction, and out of curiosity, respect for her wonder, and then another sense of attraction. Jace had accepted being a killer because he'd focus on the future. This touched the assassin. Then Vraska had told him that she'd love to forget her prisons, that of the Azorius, but also that of the other Golgari and their views on Gorgon and Kraul, that of Ravnica. Vraska told all of her history to new Jace, and he was a great listener. She told him about her time away from Ravnica, remembering the cruelty done to her people, and how she set the thought that people should die the death they deserve in stone, and still believe them to this day. Jace had the weird knowledge of how to assemble any artifact now. He used this to repair the thaumatic compass that Nicobolas gave Vraska in order to find the immortal sun, making us think that Nicobolas also gave Jace the weird knowledge of how to assemble any artifact. It seems like Bolas gave Vraska a broken compass so that Vraska would only find the sun once Bolas sent her Jace, probably in a way manipulating the pair into bringing him the sun exactly when he wanted it. But then the ship crashed. Vraska ordered her crew to fight the vampires but save the sort of morally sound locals. Then, after a bit, Jace fell through a waterfall and got his memories back. During this event, he latched his mind to Vraska's, who also saw all of Jace's memories, and she was mostly scared because Gorgons were, in her mind, meant to be hated. Jace felt love and hate for a moment. He'd seen her as a beast, but he also forgave her for doing what she thought was needed for her people, and Vraska loved Jace for listening to her story, for seeing her Golgari self as a self, an ego, something to be proud of. The pair continued and found Azor guarding the sun, the Perun of the Azorius, against the future guildmaster of the Golgari. He used law magic to bind Vraska, imprisoning her again. He ranted about how Azor had created the perfect guild system on Ravnica, but Vraska knew that the guilds had turned cruel and malicious. Where Azor had the perfect theory, Vraska had embraced the consequences. And that's exactly the difference between the Azorius and the Golgari. Theory versus consequence. Jace forced Azor to call Vraska captain, freed her, and banished Azor. Jace then wiped Vraska's memories off him so that Bolas, the mind-reading dragon, wouldn't see her love for Jace and all they had done against Nicobolas. And with the plans of Nicobolas as a reward, Vraska had overthrown Jarad as a guild leader, and Bolas had given Vraska Jarad's location so that she could kill him as well. After gaining control, Vraska fought for Gorgon rights, blaming Jarad. A Krull mind mage saw the mind block from Jace and removed it when Vraska agreed on it. She then switched sides and turned on Bolas. She then almost immediately switched sides again. She had killed Esperia in Bolas' name, and Esperia was the leader who had accepted the imprisonment of the Golgari when they attacked Vraska and their guild members. Before killing Esperia, the Azorius leader had even admitted that the plan to imprison the Golgari was morally sound in her mind, because they were a growing threat then. But Vraska felt guilty for betraying Jace and still killed Hekara on the Alliance's side in the name of Nicobolas. She then returned to Ixalan but felt guilty again, and she turned back to Ravnica once more. She then united the Golgari so that they would save the Undercity citizens from the invasion and started to attack Nicobolas, finally not changing sides again, I think. Vraska joined Jace in his assault on New Phyrexia later. She was caught and forced to fight in Shieldred's Phyrexian arena. Jace tried to save her but got hit by one of Vraska's stingers. Jace stayed with her and relived some of their happy moments on Ravnica. This did have a goal of creating a safe zone in Vraska's mind that would come in useful later. Vraska used her Golgari respect on Ravnica after being Phyrexianized, so that her guild could quickly turn and attack the city, uprooting the structure of the Golgari, their whole guild hall, and the ground of Ravnica itself, because the guild hall came up literally. During the invasion, Vraska's mind was strong enough to keep popping up a little bit to retain consciousness for a little bit. Vraska was then hit with a machine from Ralzarak, which would shock the Phyrexia out of her body. This should have paralyzed her forever. But Jace's safe zone in her mind led Vraska's mind to stay safe for long enough until Jace could come to rescue her. Jace then brought her to his mother, who was a healer, and being a mother, she instantly suggested Jace should marry the Gorgon guild leader. Vraska and Jace used the Omen Paths. Vraska went to Ixalan to find Malcolm and Breaches and recruited them, and Jace found the way to Thunder Junction. Vraska went to be a cowgirl and left the Golgari Swarm to tend for its own. Vraska worked together with Ashok, who was Scooby-Doo to later be Jace, in order to get what was in the vault on Thunder Junction. And there they found a small creature that would be the key to everything. It could map out all of the Omen Paths throughout the multiverse, and this should help them restore the multiverse in its natural state. This is important because Niv Mizzet and the Izzet are now scheming to use the Omen Paths, while Vraska from the Golgari is trying to close them. This is quickly turning into an all-out war again. Back to the guild, because there are many forces opposing Vraska. Like the current Matka of the Devkarin, Izoni. She has 1,000 eyes, because she has at least 1,000 and maybe millions of insects throughout the city, giving her information. This is also why she became the acting guildmaster after Vraska left. She says that she befriended the insects because the Devkarin had fallen from grace, not out of love for the insects or anything, while she does wear them proudly on her body at all times. Azoni was the only leader not to accept Vraska's returning role after the War of the Spark, and something tells me the strong-willed Spider Lady won't return leadership that easily. Her leadership alone shows strength, because most elves have renounced the Golgari guild. Azoni rose through the ranks of the Golgari quickly with ambition and a sense of pride. Pride was exactly what the Crawl didn't have before. Remember Vraska's quote, "If I am to be met with disrespect, then I must love myself with a fierceness no fool can take away." The Golgari now only contain the strongest, like Izoni, and the most notorious, who have no choice but to stay with the Undercity Guild. And both can do or will do with a little pride. Two small factions we have left are the Okran and the Lotleth. The Okran are the assassins who specialize in vengeance killings. Vraska often acts as an assassin for them. And the Lotleth are the necromancers, fungus binders, and the relatively intelligent undead of the guild. They are the working force led by Ratislav. They probably never will rise throughout the guild because really they are no threat to the Golgari. The Lotleth also oversee the underside of the Dead Bridge. This is a huge bridge over a sinkhole, and people fall in the hole when they cross the bridge, and the dark parts around the hole are perfect for assassins who want to dump bodies into there. The Lotleth gather the bodies that fall down and strengthen the guild with all of that rot. Golgari necromancy is the most potent of all guilds, because while other guilds learn about it, to the Golgari, death is life. To the upper Ravnicans, life is life, but they die too. That's where the Street Swarm come in. They come in whenever someone dies or whenever they think someone should die in the city. They make sure to speed up the process of the cycle, and they provide structure to the Dead Bridge so that the upper side is still found. They roam the streets to gather corpses, and they tend to the rot farms. They also tend to the corpse float valves, a series of tunnels where other debris from the city can float through and find its way to your next burger restaurant. And the Street Swarm tend to be the people who find out who's rotten from the inside out too, so that they can bring that rot to the outside. I mentioned them before, but the erstwhile zombies are more interesting than you might think. They are the most intelligent zombies of the guild and were once very high standing elves like the Devkarin, but way more ancient. They would be the only ones to be directly able to tell you about the true history of Ravnica. But they don't seem to remember anything from that time. This faction is led by Storef, a lich who focuses on resurrecting massive beasts. He was awakened by Mazarek alongside his people and was forced to obey the Crawl. But Storef was the first to retain his consciousness. And that's how the last faction of today climbed to the top of their guild. And anyone with power and pride could in this guild. That might be the most pressing matter of this guild for today. And I want to thank you for watching, have a nice day and subscribe if you liked it.